People are coming in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's webinar. We're going to wait a few more minutes to let a few other people in. We've got quite a few registered for this evening. My apologies. I'm having some technical difficulties. And although some have said that I look much better darkened this way, it's not quite the picture I wanted to portray this evening. Anyway, welcome. Give us a few more minutes to get people on board. And again, welcome everyone. My name is Peter Tabuns. I'm the MPP for Toronto-Danforth. I'm the host for this evening's meeting. We're just going to give people a few more minutes to come on board, or a minute or two more, and then we'll get underway. Thanks for joining. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Peter Tabuns. I'm the MPP for Toronto-Danforth. I'm the host for this evening's webinar town hall on childcare issues in our riding. I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement, and then we'll go on into the meeting. We acknowledge we're hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and the Inuit peoples. And as all of you would agree, it's a good thing to make a land acknowledgement, but it's even better to take action for real reconciliation in this country. The purpose of this meeting is to talk about the current state of childcare in Toronto and Ontario. Our office has been increasingly contacted by constituents who are talking about the stress that their childcare center is facing because of underfunding or space shortages, potential for impending closures and withdrawals from the $10 a day funding program. And to discuss the current situation facing parents, childcare providers, and centers, I've brought together a panel. We want to give out information, gather information from all of you, talk strategies, and from my office, offer support. And I think the panelists we have this evening are people who are deeply committed to ensuring we have a good childcare system in this province and are willing to offer support to people who are prepared to organize and protect that childcare. I want to note that we've heard from people in a number of childcare centers who are facing real problems with funding. I need to correct an error I made with regards to Blossoming Minds, which has said to its parents that it is facing difficulties, concerned about the ability to carry on under the current funding formula. I want to say to Blossoming Minds, I'm sorry that I had not checked with you before I made a public statement. I hope that you are in good shape, and I appreciate your patience. For all of you who have joined this evening, if you want to pose questions and comments, please use the Q&A function. We will not use the raised hand features and the chat. My staff will be gathering questions and sending them to me as the host, and I'll be sharing them with the panelists. And I want to note that there's a closed caption function, so you can read along if you have any hearing difficulties. Please link onto that if you want to see a transcription of what's being said. And with that, I'll just review the agenda. I'll be introducing our panelists. They'll have about 5 minutes each to speak, and then we'll have questions and commentary by you, the participants, and then closing comments and information. So our panelists, I'll introduce all three, and then I'll start back with Carolyn. Carolyn Ferns is Public Policy and Government Relations Coordinator for the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare, OCBCC. Carolyn worked for over 10 years at the Childcare Resource and Research Unit, where she co-authored the Early Childhood Education and Care in Canada series, and I have to say has been a really strong advocate at Queen's Park for childcare. Donna Spreitzer served as the Executive Director of Jackman Community Daycare for 18 years. As a longtime advocate for childcare, Donna is now heading up the Toronto Coalition for Better Childcare, where she has been actively supporting the nonprofit childcare sector in Toronto, and I have to say has always been a very powerful force in our community, promoting the need to support and extend childcare. And Sara Ehrhardt. Sara was elected as TDSB trustee for Ward 15. That's this area, Toronto-Danforth, in October of 2022. Sara has extensive firsthand insight in community organizing and advocacy work with experience sitting on her child's school advisory council, working on the successful Save S.H. Armstrong Community Centre pool campaign, and is the co-founder of the Toronto East Enders for Childcare, where she helped save city and school childcare centres from cuts. And that's where I first got a chance to meet Sara. Very effective. So again, if you have questions or comments, please plug them into the Q&A. And we'll start off. Carolyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for putting together this great panel. And it looks like there's lots of folks joining us, 95 folks joining us tonight to talk about childcare. And, you know, as you titled tonight, you know, this the looming crisis in childcare. But from my work in childcare over many years, I know that childcare's almost always been in a state of crisis. Since I started working, you know, 20 years ago as an early child educator, and certainly when I was a parent of my infant, when I became a parent, when I was pregnant and getting on wait lists for childcare, it's always been a struggle. And for too long, it's been a silent struggle, right? It was something that was left to individual parents, families to try to figure out how to solve this childcare crisis, how to navigate through this maze of a system or a non-system of a patchwork to try to find a childcare space, and then to try to afford it when childcare fees were a second mortgage or a second rent payment for families, when childcare fees here in Ontario were the highest childcare fees in the country. Now, that part, the part about the childcare fees, is the one thing that started to change with the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. If you're a family that's lucky enough to have one of those childcare spaces, now you've actually seen your childcare fees almost more than cut in half. And we know that the Canada-wide early learning and childcare plan that, you know, childcare advocates, families, feminists, you know, advocates across the country pushed for decades, it's starting to make a difference for some families across the country. But if you're a parent, or family, or thinking about starting a family here in Ontario, I would forgive you for wondering, you know, when the 10-a-day plan is going to get here, and when will it start to increase your chances of finding a childcare space before your child, you know, starts school. Because certainly that's the reality that families are facing, right? We know that there are growing wait lists for childcare, and we know that childcare centers, many of them aren't even at capacity right now, let alone thinking about expanding, not because they don't want to, but for two reasons. One, the childcare workforce crisis, which is something that's been with us for many years. We've always had in childcare problems recruiting and retaining enough early childhood educators because of the low wages in the sector. And that's been the truth for, you know, again, for decades. But since COVID, that childcare workforce crisis has gotten much worse. And it's now at a point that the childcare workforce crisis is causing childcare programs to have to close rooms, to have to limit their enrollment, to have to ask parents to keep their child home a day a week because they simply cannot staff adequately. Now, as I say, these are all problems that we knew were there. I mean, I wrote a report during the pandemic that was called Forgotten on the Front Line, which we gave to the Ontario government. And it said that the survey that we did of early childhood educators said that more than half of the people we surveyed were thinking about leaving the sector. And it was like an alarm bell. But, you know, when the Ontario government signed on to the Canada-wide early learning and childcare plan, you know, they made a plan to lower fees for families. They made a plan to expand spaces, or at least they had a goal that they wanted to achieve. But what they didn't do was have an adequate workforce strategy. to ensure that we had the early child educators and childcare workers to staff these programs so that they're running at capacity, or to fund childcare programs adequately so that they weren't scrambling and that they felt secure, they felt stable, and they felt able to expand their programs, which is what we need to happen to actually meet the need, the demand for childcare and the level of access that we need to get to. But, you know, the problem that we're facing now is we have this new Canada-wide early learning and childcare plan, and the temptation, and I see this even amongst, you know, many childcare advocates, is to blame the new plan, right? Because wait a second, wait lists are going up. Surely that's the Canada-wide early learning and childcare plan's fault, right? But that's one of those kind of logical fallacies that just because something is happening means that it's the fault of the new thing. Some of these problems have been here for a long time. And the other thing that we have to realize is that, you know, while the federal government has invested $30 billion into lowering childcare fees across the country, and here in Ontario, $4 billion, you know, already invested into lowering fees here in Ontario. Childcare is still primarily a provincial responsibility, and childcare programs rely on provincial childcare funding. Those general operating funds, right? That's what childcare programs need to make their budgets work. And the truth is that the Ford government has, you know, actually cut provincial childcare funding while they've been in office. And since signing on to the federal childcare plan, they actually are not supposed to be allowed to cut it. They can't displace provincial funding with federal funding, but they've flatlined it for the last 3 years. But the truth is, you know, childcare funding from the province, provincial funding, is lower today than it was in 2018 when the Ford government was elected. And if that provincial childcare funding simply kept pace with inflation, we'd have $500 million more in the childcare budget here in Ontario this year than we do. So we're trying to expand the childcare system, and our provincial government has been happy to accept money from the federal government to lower fees for families, which means demand has gone up. But our provincial government is not doing what they need to do to solve the workforce crisis, to fund childcare programs, to make changes to the funding formula so that childcare programs actually get what they need day to day, month to month to survive and keep their doors open, and to think about expanding. And so I think, you know, if we look big picture, those are the reasons to me that we're in the situation that we're in now, right? And so where our coalition is putting our advocacy is both to the federal government and the provincial government, right? I think this is, you know, the federal government, they've set this as a goal and a target. They're putting a lot of money into Ontario childcare, and they need to ensure that the next time they negotiate a deal with Ontario, they make sure it has the strings attached to ensure that Ontario is doing their part to roll this out properly. Because I think the agreement that they signed with Ontario left Ontario way too open, the provincial government way too open to be able to make some really bad decisions, which is what we're seeing. And our advocacy is also, of course, to the provincial government to say, listen, you need to correct these mistakes. You need to have a major course correction here, right? We need to address the childcare workforce crisis with decent work and pay. We need to do what other provinces are already doing, bringing in a wage grid or salary scale for early child educators. In Nova Scotia, they've already done that. In Nova Scotia, they've brought in a pension plan for ECEs, and that's helping with retention. And here in Ontario, we only have a wage floor, and it's shamefully low. ECEs describe it as a slap in the face. And although Ontario announced they were raising the wage floor to $23.86 this year, they haven't even done that yet, and they announced it in November. No ECEs have even seen the money. So we're falling further and further behind. So we're going to be pushing the province to, you know, really stop dragging its heels on childcare, to solve the workforce crisis, to expand spaces so that more families can get access to childcare that they need, and so that we're finally starting to build, you know, a really universal childcare system where we have affordable fees for families, decent work and pay for early child educators and childcare workers, and enough spaces for all. Because that's the vision, that's the dream, right? Thanks, everybody.
What, Peter,
Peter,
you
you're
are muted.
muted.
You'd think after a few years you'd get used to this, right? Anyway, my apologies. Donna, I turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you, Peter, for convening this meeting. Carolyn said a lot, some of what I was going to say, but I wanted people to know that it's important for parents, childcare workers, and citizens at large to understand what's going on and what's at the heart of the Canada-wide early years, Canada-wide childcare and early years program. Whether you call it QUELC, SeaWell, $10 a day daycare, whatever it's called, it is experiencing severe growing pains. What the federal government envisioned is not quite what is being delivered in Ontario. We know childcare centers can't balance their books. We know too many families don't have access to affordable childcare. And we know that childcare belongs in schools and communities and not in strip malls. A month ago, I attended a roundtable hosted by the City of Toronto where 60 childcare stakeholders convened to discuss the QUELC rollout. When it was first announced a few years back, everyone was thrilled to finally see a national universal childcare program. Regrettably, the rollout in Ontario has fallen far short of being universal, affordable, accessible, or sustainable. We know that QUELC is working in other provinces, like Carolyn said, and we know it's not working well here. At the roundtable, stakeholders agreed that the impediment is the province of Ontario. Furthermore, we agreed that we need some momentum to sway this government. We are going to need parents, taxpayers, childcare workers, and the City of Toronto to embark on a concerted campaign to shake this government to loosen their purse strings. Ontario needs to pay their fair share to make this program successful. We know they are not investing enough in funding the actual costs of childcare. They have not followed through on funding capital projects. For example, there are over 50 proposed childcare centers and schools that are already approved. I'm sure Sara's going to touch on this. Many are shovel ready, and yet the province will not release enough of the funding for them to proceed. This leaves thousands more parents without childcare. The QUELC funding formula is flawed in Ontario. Money trickling down to childcare centers does not cover the actual expenses required to operate a childcare center. I hear from our members every day that they are struggling financially and are not having to make difficult decisions. Childcare centers are relying on their reserves just to make ends meet. We are a third of the way into 2024, and centers don't know where the money will come from to balance their books. Every childcare center that I know of ended 2023 in a deficit and started their 2024 budget not knowing where the money was going to come from. Some centers have had to charge more for school-age children to recoup revenues, and that was never envisioned. We weren't supposed to charge some families more, and still others are closing rooms and considering opting out of QUELC altogether. There was a recent op-ed in the Hamilton Spectator where the writer queried, is Ontario deliberately setting up the QUELC agreement to fail? I don't have the answer, but what I do know is that this is not just a Toronto problem. It's not just a Toronto-Danforth problem. This is an Ontario problem. Typically, my organization, the Toronto Community for Better Childcare, focuses just on Toronto. But it's clear that to make QUELC sustainable in Toronto, we need all levels of government to work together. The Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Program is good at its foundation. We need QUELC to be successful. Low-cost, accessible childcare is so important, and we can't lose sight of this. The bottom line is that Ontario needs to invest more in children and families. Thanks.
Donna, thanks very much. Before I go on to Sara Ehrhardt, just a reminder, if you want to put a question to any of the panelists, please type it into the Q&A function or comment. I can relay those later. Claire, you've got your hand raised, but we aren't using that function in this process this evening. So again, if you have questions or comments, please type them into the Q&A. When our next speaker is finished, then we'll go to those. Sara, I turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. I hope everyone can hear me. Just looking at the other panelists, we're good. Hi, everybody. And I'm really, we've got over 100 attendees, and I'm really happy. I see some familiar names there, some childcare center operators, some childcare activists. I see a neighbor's name. It's nice to see everybody here. I wish I could see all your faces as well, but it's amazing to have this kind of format, because particularly when we're talking about childcare, we're often at homes with kids having this discussion. And so to that end, I may have my child, my little one, come up at some point during this discussion. My apologies in advance, but that's how it goes. So my name is Sara Ehrhardt, and I'm now the elected school board trustee, public school trustee for Toronto-Danforth, and I'm very proud to have been elected to serve by this community. Childcare is where I got my start in advocacy in the Toronto-Danforth community. And I want to speak quickly to that, because I think some of the principles that myself and other parents under, at that time, the banner Toronto EastEnders for Childcare. There are many banners for childcare as we go through our phases of torch carrying in this advocacy. I think the three principles we were advocating for then still apply. And Carolyn and Donna have spoken to this as well. They were accessibility, affordability, and accountability. And my experience as a parent was that while the affordability issues were crippling, I couldn't get to that point if I couldn't access childcare. And the ability to access childcare continues to be a barrier for the majority of families. And I want to emphasize that the information that has been presented to me as a school board trustee that was made available through Toronto City Council around childcare availability in the city of Toronto is that Toronto-Danforth is one of the areas of the city where we have the most licensed childcare availability. And I recognize there's other childcare, but I'm going to speak about licensed childcare for this. We are in the 40 to 45% range for access of licensed childcare. What that means is that we are in the 55 to 60% of lack of access for children of those age groups for licensed childcare. That's the majority of children, the majority of families. In some parts of the city, that is as high as 80%. And so this is, it's at the forefront of every family's mind is access, queue management, timing, and as a result, it continues to be a fundamental economic development issue and social issue and rights issue for our children who have the right to access childcare. To me, it's the rights of the child that are predominant, not just our economic arguments, but children have a right to access to people who are caring experts in the field. They deserve that from the youngest of ages, in addition to the care of their parents and caregivers. And so that has been what has really motivated me to continue in this advocacy. So accessibility continues to be our number one issue as parents. And as a Toronto District School Board trustee, it continues to be the issue I am seeing from constituents. And I look forward to hearing from people. Donna mentioned quickly our fight with the province around building childcare centers. Now, I want to say these centers are not being built or proposed to be built in Toronto-Danforth. They're being proposed in Scarborough and in Humber. But this is a fight worth fighting This is access for families in our city and equity. And the debate that is on the table is, why are these centers so expensive? And I want to make that clear because it matters for our community too. Building childcare in places where families are is expensive and will only get more expensive the longer we wait. It would have been cheaper in the 1970s. Children are still going to the schools where we want to build that childcare. They will continue to be going to the schools where we want to build that childcare in 2075. And so we need to build that childcare at those locations, and that is what it costs. And the Toronto Catholic District School Board is facing that same challenge. This is a challenge across the province. Childcare needs to be where the children are and where the families are that need it. And it will cost what it costs in those locations. And so that is the message that I continue to seek to send in my advocacy. And it's why I think this debate and the fight that we at the Toronto District School Board as trustees have been very steadfast in taking up. I think that's why it's a fight worth fighting, because building the universal childcare system that we value requires those kinds of investments, and it requires all orders of government to stop dithering on making the decisions that we've known for decades are needed in these specific locations, right? And that will be the case. That is the case here in Toronto-Danforth as well. To build access beyond 45%, that 45%, it's expensive up front, but the gains for children, for families, for communities, for our economy is worth it. And it will only get more expensive. And so it's with that passion that I'm advocating for this, to build this access and to build it in the way that makes sense for families. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from people tonight more on what you are experiencing. I'll say one quick point that I am hearing from families more and more: challenges around before and after care access as well. I'm hearing it. And as Carolyn mentioned around the workforce crisis, I'm seeing it with my own eyes with ECEs at school levels. But I'm seeing how all of this workforce crisis has wraparound impacts into the before and after care systems as well. And so I hope some of that was helpful as we continue on in this discussion. And I really want to thank Donna and Carolyn, who've been advocating for this for so long. I appreciate all of your work. And I want to really thank Peter Tabuns, who's been a champion for this cause. And as a parent, I remain grateful to you. And now as an elected representative alongside you, I'm proud to stand beside you on this. And just thanks very much.
Well, thanks, Sara. That's very kind. I appreciate it. I want to go on to the questions. Just a note to all of you: if you have a question or comment, please type it into the Q&A, and then I'll be feeding that to the panelists. Before I go to the first question, I have to say we did ask a question in question period this morning about the state of childcare, because it's not just in my riding. Donna, as I think you said, it's all over Toronto, it's all over Ontario. And what we got back from the Minister of Education was that no one has ever done better on childcare than this government, and that we should all be grateful. And it was just this astounding gap between the reality and the talking points that are put out by the government. Carolyn, you set out very well at the beginning the huge financial problem that we're facing, that this government is not actually addressing in the way that needs to be addressed. Anyway, enough editorializing from me. I will go to the questions. And the first one, I was informed that there is a quote pause in the funding toward $10 a day program. It was supposed to come in January 2024. When is the next decrease coming towards $10 a day? Carolyn, I think you're the person to start in on that.
Yeah, sure. So there's two different points in there. One is about this phrase pause on funding. So funding hasn't stopped flowing to the Canada-wide system or to childcare. What we're waiting for from the Ontario government is a new funding formula. And so what we have now is they're just continuing they froze childcare fees and they make up the difference with public funding. It's this fee replacement model, which was supposed to be temporary. And they said they were going to change it and bring in a new funding formula, which is going to make more sense and make things easier last year. And then they didn't do it. And we don't know why they didn't do it. And we're still waiting for this new funding formula from Ontario. So that's the part around that you might have heard about pause funding or why the funding is frozen the way it is. But the other question around fee reductions, that's a little bit easier to answer. So the way Ontario lowered the fees was that when they first signed on, it was 25% fee reduction, then 50. Right now it's at about 52.75%. So if you were paying full fees back before that signed, you're paying 52.75% less now. But there is a question about whether or not there was going to be another fee reduction before we actually get to $10 a day. There may be, but at this point they have not announced one for this year, a further fee reduction. What we know will happen is that in 2025, 26, it'll get down to that average of $10 a day. That's what Ontario signed on to do. That's what they're committed they have to do. What I wouldn't be surprised to see though is them announcing some interim fee reduction, because as somebody said to me, Ontario likes their announceables. They like to announce things, and you never know when and you never know why. But I wouldn't bank on that. And what we do know is going to happen is the fee reduction will happen in 2025, 26 down to $10 a day, or an average of $10 a day, to be clear.
Carolyn, thanks very much for that. Next question I'm going to go to. We're having a hard time finding childcare with the CWELCC due to the wait list being too long. Waitlisting in the area are upwards of 18 to 24 months. We had no idea we'd be adopting a toddler when we went through the adoption process. If we naturally conceived a child, we would have placed our child on the wait list before we conceived, as seems to be the practice. We were told when asking around, and therefore we couldn't have an issue finding daycare. Sorry. It's terrible. Sometimes questions slide around. This places adoptive parents at a disadvantage in trying to get daycare, as everyone has already had a head start in preparing. Is there someone who would particularly like to address that? Donna? Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm not sure people are going to like my answer. Because of the lack of childcare in Toronto, in the province, wherever you are, there are always wait lists. And whether you prioritize families, siblings, like some childcare centers prioritize siblings, which means that if you have a singleton, you might not get into a particular center because the center is being filled by siblings. So yes, I hear you. Often people are at a disadvantage. Newcomers to our communities are at a disadvantage because they might have just arrived in Toronto, and people have been on the wait list for years. So this is simply another indication of how our system is broken, and there aren't enough spaces to go around. So everybody's vying for the same spots. So I don't have an answer for you on that. There are some centers that prioritize, for example, I know of centers that prioritize people who are in nearby shelters in their area. And it's based on the center in your neighborhood or wherever you're going to. So wait lists are a problem. We hear you, but we need more childcare to solve that problem.
Okay, thank you, Donna. I'm going to go to the next comment followed by a question. Comment: our childcare's waiting list has doubled from 400 to 800 plus. School age numbers are dropping and we can no longer fill our school age rooms. We're running at 30 instead of 60. There's no means of tracking the children that move into school age programs that are still 5 years, some until December. Therefore, no funding is being received to cover the 52.75% fee reduction. This year for us, that will be a loss of $20,000. Just for this, never mind the losses from lack of other funding to cover actual cost of operations. We've requested an additional 26 spaces for kindergarten as we have a high demand for this, and we could probably fill more than that. We've been approved for the space, but have not been approved for funding through QUELC. So the question, who makes the decision on where new daycares are located? Is it possible to expand existing daycares that are in schools? Will the school board help by lowering the cost of land? I agree they're needed where the families are. And with that, Sara, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'll just say on the first point, I want to say I'm sorry. Like I hear these, I'm sorry. These are frustrating situations. And it's sounding to me like the first one, the system is not nimble or flexible enough. And it's shocking because and I'm sorry, I don't want to get too political, but this like cut red tape government is putting a lot of red tape up in our communities when they're changing demographics, right? And that's a really important thing to note because this can be an ongoing reality in Toronto-Danforth and other communities when populations kind of stabilize, that the children are going to move through the system. And so I think that's a really important point to raise, is the need for them to be nimble and to cut the red tape out of the childcare logistics. I'll also note in terms of expanding in schools, this is a particular passion of mine. Right now, the dialogue is around obtaining childcare in my goal is every school, but there has been a priority list generated that has been on the table now for years. Some of the projects are shovel ready. They are childcare centers that would be co-located with schools in areas that are childcare deserts and where the school does not have a current space for childcare. In those instances, because the question was around, can the land be offered at a discount? The land is being offered, and TDSB is putting funding to support the building of the childcare, and it is the province of Ontario that is not releasing capital monies committed through federal provincial agreements to build that childcare. We can't get to expanding until we release the funds to build this first round of childcare centers that we have been waiting for years now. And the Toronto District School Board and Catholic District School Board have gotten together and been united on this as an issue. The province needs to release the funds. The shovel-ready projects just keep getting more expensive. And so TDSB, as I understand it, is prepared to be a partner, and I will continue to advocate for that for childcare. But the province needs to get on board with all other orders of government who are already there. I hope that's helpful. And I'm sorry for the passion with it. I have a great deal of frustration by the lack of action on the province on this one.
Sara, thanks very much. And I have to say, many of us in question period in the legislature feel the same sort of frustration, especially when we're told that this is the best of all possible worlds that's been created. Next question, Carolyn, Donna, I'm going to leave this to the two of you because it's a larger policy question. We see a two-tier system in the province in the treatment of childcare operators. For-profit operators and their challenges are often ignored. Funding to nonprofit centers is disproportionately significantly higher. Centers offering alternative pedagogy, such as Montessori, are not being treated fairly with respect to remuneration. My question is quite simply, why? Carolyn, Donna, do either of you want to start in on that?
Sure, there's certainly a lot in the question because it mentions several different types of early years and childcare programs, right? So the one thing about the Canada-wide early learning and childcare plan is that it was designed for licensed childcare. And that's simply because that's the type of childcare where there's government oversight. And for reasons of accountability, that's where this public funding is going to flow. So it was designed for licensed childcare. Not to say that there isn't value in other arrangements, unregulated arrangements that people, offering home childcare, regulated or unregulated, don't do a good job. They do. Many of them do, of course. But this program, for reasons of accountability, was focused on licensed childcare. The question around profit, for profit, I think that childcare advocates struggled with this question for a long time. The Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare, we always said that, we were looking at building a public and nonprofit system. When it came time to build the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, I think everybody recognized that all of the programs that exist now need to be part of the system. Nobody wants a family not to be able to access affordable childcare because the childcare center in their neighborhood happens to be a for-profit. So childcare advocacy organizations even said, grandparent those programs and bring them in and make them part of the system too. And the federal government agreed with that and said that while the expansion of the Canada-wide system should be primarily public and nonprofit, that existing for-profit programs are welcome to be part of the system. And the provincial government, our provincial government, certainly I don't think has shown to be discriminating against for-profits. In fact, Minister Lecce, Peter will know from his statements in the House, is often defending for-profits. So I don't really see discrimination against for-profit childcare programs from my perspective. I think that where we're probably going to have to have some difficult discussions is about the question of how much profit should be made in childcare, right? And the role not of small independent operators so much as large childcare chains, which are increasingly looking at Ontario because they can see public funding flowing and they see this as an opportunity. And private equity sees this as an opportunity. So we have to put in place guardrails. That's the honest truth. And as you said before, Donna, this might not be a popular answer, but we have to put in guardrails about profit because, not everyone has the best interest of children and families in mind the way, many small operators do. Large international, multinational private equity groups are looking at this, and that's not what we want for our childcare system, right? I think we do need to be moving to a public and nonprofit system with all existing providers, invited to be part of that.
Thank you.
And the only thing
Donna?
I would add is that I think the government is ignoring all center operators, not just the for-profit. We have the same complaints with all of our members, and our members are nonprofit operators. I don't know who the government is listening to make their decisions, but I don't think they're really listening to childcare providers, and I don't think they're listening to families.
Sara, did you want to speak to that as well?
I just wanted to say a thank you to the women entrepreneurs, the momtrepreneurs, my neighbors who, in the absence of government action, have been stepping up to fill gaps through every kind of means. And I think that it really, that needs to be acknowledged in this too, is that it's everybody has been gap filling, absent a functional system. And so I just want to acknowledge that hard work of mostly women in this sector, and how frustrating it is when there's such a scarce pie, when we know the potential, when this is functional. And thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to go to the next question. I have infant twins, but make too much as a household to benefit from a subsidy. What are my realistic options? A few different centers have informed us that even if there is a space in the infant rooms, they may get unenrolled for the toddler room. A space may not be available. This means that after being on a needed wait list since being pregnant, I may only get 6 months of care. Then what? How am I supposed to plan for what happens when they become toddlers? I'm happy to give it to whoever would like to. Carolyn, you're unmuted.
That's an excellent question, and it sounds like such a difficult situation, and it speaks to, I think, 2 points that I've heard come up quite a bit in our conversations with parents and families. So we've been running now. We had our second session, forming a parent and family network of childcare advocates. And I see somebody in the chat asking about what can they do in advocacy. So yeah, I'll put the information on our next session there. But what we heard from families really clearly was the issue of wait lists. It comes up again and again. And as you said, Donna, it's a hallmark of the fact that we have scarcity, right? We have not enough childcare spaces. And so there are wait lists. But, you know, just because there are wait lists doesn't mean that wait lists have to be badly managed or, you know, or done in such an unfair way. Like being dropped back to the bottom of a list when your child ages from one program to another, that makes no sense, and it doesn't have to be that way. It can be administered better than that, and many programs do administer it better. Some regions have created centralized wait lists. We don't have that here in Toronto. And so every childcare operator maintains their own wait lists. And I've heard from operators saying that's really onerous to do. So there's lots of things we could do to try to make it more fair, or at least more transparent as to what the waiting process is and how long it's going to be, so that parents know at the outset. I talked to a parent who said, you know, well, I got on a wait list. And it was like everybody who, you know, knew about the childcare system said, only one wait list. Why didn't you get onto 20? And it's like, well, they didn't know they had to get onto 20, right? And why should they know, right? So we need to have, you know, a better job of communicating and more fair and transparent process of what wait lists are about, while, you know, at the same time, the real solution is a much more aggressive plan to expand childcare spaces and solve the workforce crisis so that families aren't left in these kinds of situations.
Carolyn, thanks very much for that. Just a reminder to everyone, if you have a question or comment, please post it into the Q&A. I've got a number of questions coming up, but we can certainly use more. The next question is, will the $10 a day count toward before and or after school daycare? By the looks of it, it will cost more than the all-day daycare. Donna, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah. The rollout, the federal rollout targeted children 5 and under. And right now there has it, you know, we're still trying to figure out Quelk. It's only a few years old. My hope is that eventually it will expand to include all children 12 and under, because of course we all know you can't be 6 years old or 7-year-old and be latchkey. You can't, you know, you need to be supervised by adults. So, but right now, it is a federal plan that targets the youngest. And so it is true that at this moment in time, children who go to a B&A program, a before and after school program, may very well be paying as much or more than children who are currently being subsidized to the tune of 52%. So it isn't in the the law right now, but it's certainly something that parents should be advocating for, because childcare doesn't stop when you're 6.
Donna, thanks very much for that.
If I can just add on to that, one of the
Yes.
interesting things is that the federal government, in not this past federal election, the one before, they actually had a platform plank around school-age childcare, which then appeared to sort of disappear into thin air as to when that was going to happen or how it was going to happen. But yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all that school-age childcare isn't part of this plan, and so I think that there should be focused advocacy, both the federal and provincial government, to bring school-age childcare into CWELC.
Okay, Thanks, Carolyn. Next question, and Sara, I'm going to put this to you. Denmark is a country with a population of 6 million. More than 80% of children have access to affordable, quality childcare. Why can't Ontario, with a population of 15 million, not do the same? Sara?
That's a great question, Peter. I feel like it's begging me to tell the story of my family. I birthed my child in Sweden. I was working in Sweden. My partner, my spouse, lives here in Toronto. I was living and working in Sweden when I became pregnant, and so I sought to get on wait lists in Toronto, thinking we may eventually unite our family in Toronto. And when I gave birth in Sweden, and I say Sweden because it's very similar to the situation in Denmark, the situation in Scandinavia overall, I birthed my child on a Wednesday. Sorry, I birthed my child on a Sunday. And on the following Wednesday, I received a letter in the mail indicating where my child would be able to go to school from the age of 1. My area community school, which had the childcare where my child would be invited at that point within days of giving birth to come back to Canada, to Toronto, filled me with a rage as I sought to navigate these wait lists. At that time, I was very grateful to Peter Tabuns and other leaders who sought to remove waitlist fees. I do know that childcare centers incur costs, but it was leadership at that time for the fees that we were paying. And I say this in part to give everybody hope. This is a frustrating journey. It is shocking as a nation, as a province, how many decades we have gone and how this gap has grown with other jurisdictions in terms of childcare access, affordability, and accountability, which is safety and transparency for our kids. That gap only continues to grow while the province of Ontario does not get on side with building this model. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think it's absolutely possible. I've seen it. They've just been at it for a lot more decades. And our job is to keep at it so that our children are not doing this in this way. And I'm very passionate about that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. Any other comments? Okay. Question. I've opened a new licensed home daycare agency recently, and it looks like it's impossible to obtain QUELC funding. Feels like the access is closed to the new providers, but the demand is very high from families, and they don't have access to QUELC. Please let me know if it would be possible to obtain QUELC for new providers. Carolyn, did you want to speak to that?
Sure, I can speak to that, but as to specific advice, I would be in touch with your the municipality to try to figure out what's happening for your specific case. Well, I have heard similar stories from some childcare centers, and this is a home childcare agency, but of new or recently opened childcare centers that thought that they could automatically join CWELC, and then found that because we've moved into this new directed growth strategy, they don't fall within a priority area. This doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think directed growth makes a lot of sense to me. And the idea is that we want childcare to be expanding where it's needed most, right? Instead of what we've relied on forever, which is the popcorn model. It's just wherever the childcare pops up, that's where it is. But to have some kind of planning process, right? I think we all want that. What doesn't make sense is the childcare programs that have fallen into this kind of gap that were already in the process of opening, but missed some random deadline to opt in, they're being left out and being told that they're part of the new directed growth, except they're not in the right area, so you don't quite fit, and that's not really great. And I think that, you know, that doesn't make any sense, right? We've certainly talked to the Ministry of Education about this. I talked to them on behalf of a childcare program in the Jane and Finch area that was experiencing this same problem, to try to explain that, like, you know, it's a small number of centers really, and in this case, a home childcare agency, that fall into this category, and they should just be brought into the system. That doesn't make any sense. Because, you know, what they face then is that, you know, they have families join their center, but as soon as they find a space in Seawalk, they leave. And it's not viable for them. So I think talking to both the municipality and the province about that to try to find a workaround for them is the thing to do.
Donna, you wanted to speak to that too?
Yeah, it just goes back to Sarah's comment about the red tape, that the government is not being nimble. Like they extended the initial deadline for childcare centers and operators to sign up for QUELC, but then since then, when there's been new opportunities to sign up for QUELC, it's just been a small window, and if you miss it or you're not in the right neighborhood or whatever, you lose that opportunity, because it's not just for new operators. If you are an existing childcare center and you want to open that toddler room and you're not in the right area of growth, you can't always expand. So there seem to be a lot of roadblocks right now that I don't know if it's simply that we're experienced, like it's part of the growing pains and they'll eventually be worked out, but I hear you. And it's not just the home childcare centers that are struggling to expand or sign on to QUELC. There seem to be a lot of roadblocks.
Okay, thank you. And just a note, I see Elizabeth, you've raised your hand, but we're not using the hand raising as a way of addressing questions. Please plug your question into the Q&A and hopefully we'll get to it. We're at 8:30. We're wrapping up at 8:45. So we'll take a few more questions and then I'll have some comments from our panelists. Next question. Initially, home daycare agencies were supposed to sign one QUELC agreement with the municipality. The agency head office is located. Sorry, that's not clear to me. To sign one QUELC agreement with the municipality. 10 months after the process changed and required the home daycare agency to request funding and approval to operate a home daycare with the municipality, where the home daycare is located. This creates an influx of refusal due to a lack of understanding and serious conflict of interest because municipalities prioritize their directly operating home daycare agencies. How can we grow if the municipalities is the one who receives QUELC funding, the one who reviews license revision, and the one who can approve the license application? Carolyn?
I think it's a similar situation. It's this move from approving any program that came in, which was really what was happening when Seawalk was first announced, right? It was about getting programs opted in. That's what the first year was all about. And we got to 92% opt-in, and then they extended it a bit and you could just keep opting in. But it's the province that is now, that's ended. And municipalities, they're the service system managers, right? They don't really have a lot of say in it. They're been given the funding guidelines, they've been given the guidelines on directed growth, and they're carrying them out. They often get a lot of the flack because they're the people, they're the face of it. But really, it's this move to a directed growth strategy. So there's additional rules. You have to show that you're financially viable. You have to show that you're in one of the directed growth areas, things like that. And so I think that's primarily the issue that we're seeing. And again, I think all of that could be communicated much more clearly to operators so that they don't get their hopes up or start making plans and then find out that they can't make those plans become real. And at the same time, we need to have more funding and a plan to build more spaces more quickly so that programs like this can become part of the system.
Thank you. Donna, you wanted to speak to this as well.
I just wanted to say that it does seem like some kind of a conflict of interest with the municipalities, but the fact of the matter is that for whatever reason in Ontario, it is those service system managers. There's 47 big municipalities around the province, and they have always had childcare as part of their function. And so when QUELC came into Ontario, it was this federal funding that the provincial government gets the funding, but they pass it to the municipalities. I get the impression that it's an unusual system, meaning other provinces, the feds gave it to the province and the province passed it on to the centers. But in Ontario, we've always been special. And so it's always been our municipalities that deal with childcare. The province is not in the business of operating childcare.
Yeah,
Carolyn?
that's true. That's true. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Donna, and you explain it really well. I think that, you know, overall the issue that we see with municipalities, what they're facing is they kind of feel a bit squeezed by the province. They're given a lot of rules about how they're supposed to carry things out, and not really much leeway in governing their systems, although they're called the service system managers. But you know, the municipal role, regional role in planning and service system management is actually a good one. And other provinces are actually looking to Ontario to say, actually, that actually has some promise, because it's a level of government that's closest to the ground, right? And Sara, you were talking about the Danish childcare system and the Swedish childcare system. Both of those are ones where the municipalities, they actually are the ones that carry that out, right? That's how it works in both Sweden and Denmark as municipal management.
We're getting low on time. I've got a comment here. We're going to continue losing childcare workers and RECEs, registered early childhood educators, if this wage grid is not going to be addressed by the government. We truly need better pay, benefits, and working conditions. Yeah,
that's
absolutely. Yeah.
Plus one. I was just going to say that, you know, we've been advocating in the Toronto community, and I know Peter, you have, and Sara, you have as well, around the workforce and a wage grid, right?
Yes.
The coalition and the Association of Early Child Educators, we have a position paper and policy brief that lays out what we think should be included in a wage grid for early child educators and childcare workers. We've presented this to the government again and again. But what we're seeing now, which is really good and something that gives me a bit of hope, is that, you know, other provinces are moving ahead. And the way this works with the provinces under a federal plan is that you start to get competition, right? You can see that, oh, wait a second, Nova Scotia is doing this. And actually now it's happening in Manitoba, and now it's happened in PEI, and now it's happened in Newfoundland and British Columbia, and Ontario needs to step up, right? And the federal budget just the other day actually had language in it saying that ECEs are the cornerstone of the Canada-wide system, and that provinces and territories, they're making it a priority that provinces and territories should be improving wages. So that signals to me that the federal government could make this a priority in their next round of negotiations with Ontario, which would be, you know, another good, you know, somebody else pushing on them. Of course, I think the federal government could do more themselves on this. But I think that, you know, we need to continue our advocacy. We have a campaign called Worth More that's exactly about getting a wage grid for ECs and childcare workers, and we're going to continue to push the province on.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take this last question, and then I'm going to ask the three of you for some wrap-up remarks. So moving on to action items. Question: we have been informed by our for-profit childcare center they expect to opt out of QUELC this fall because this model, as it currently exists, simply doesn't work for them. This means daycare costs for our toddler will double, plus we have a newborn that we need childcare for this fall. Due to lack of access and long wait lists, it's not an option for us to try and find another center under QUELC. What is being done to ensure daycare centers currently under QUELC don't opt out? Donna, you first.
Well, the system was designed so that people could opt in or out. So I don't know that anything is mandated by the feds or the province to keep people locked in. So we do know that last year in Toronto, 7 childcare centers opted out. And already this year, 1 center has opted out. So that's a total of 8 centers have opted out of QUELC. many of them, in fact, most of them have been the for-profit centers that have opted out. What we can do to help centers not opt out is basically to pressure the government to change the funding formula so that it fully provides revenue, the revenue replacement that will cover all expenses, because we are seeing every childcare center, be it for-profit, nonprofit, is struggling to get enough revenue to cover all expenses. And so that might be for the first year, people were able to use the reserves to kind of make things work out. But the government absolutely has to increase the amount of money that they are putting into the QUELC program, and that's the province paying their fair share, or else we are going to see more and more centers opting out, which would be a real shame, because the whole intent of this program was to support families, and it was not to destabilize the system. But in Ontario, we are seeing some destabilization. So we need to pressure the government. So we can do it if we unite and if we get parents on board, and we need the province to pay their fair share, is the real answer, because your center does have the prerogative to opt out, unfortunately. And it will be a shame if they do.
Okay. Donna, thank you very much for that. I just want to give our three panelists a minute each to wrap up, and then we'll close. Why don't I go in reverse order? Sara, do you want to make the first closing remark?
Certainly. I just want to thank everybody for joining. It's hard to hear these stories because it's hard to hear the reserve stories. At TDSB, we're dealing with the fact that our reserves have been drained as well. It's painful to hear that the sectors that care and that are responsible for the well-being of our children in all of our diverse ways are facing this. And it does fill me with a rage. That rage, though, fuels my advocacy and passion to keep moving forward. I take heart that there has been progress made, and that even if that progress is fragile, it is worth fighting for. And for everyone who is here, because there's so many attendees, and for the many that are struggling, if it's your center that is struggling through this red tape, if you are a parent who is struggling with uncertainty around what will happen with this wait list, or how will I get through here, or what am I going to do if the fees change, I want to let you know that you can do this, and that I'm sorry that you have to do it, but that we are in it together. In our struggle and in our advocacy for this. You are not alone. And please don't think that this is your struggle alone. We are better and stronger together across all of this in uniting in our advocacy. And so I want to thank everybody for coming and joining. And I want to thank Peter for convening us. And I look forward to more continued work with everybody. And thank you.
Thank you, Sara. Donna.
I chime in on everything Sara has said. It's really hard to sit up here and not have better answers. I've been working for childcare and, supporting the center I used to work at, and now in my role at the Toronto Community for Better Childcare, really trying to advocate for more and better childcare. And it is frustrating. And especially when you see so many questions that just seem so daunting. I hope Carolyn speaks to the fact that her organization, the OCBCC, and another organization, the AECEO, have actually convened trainings for parents on how to become advocates. But we do need to use our voices. It's writing letters to the editor, getting childcare on the agenda at every meeting, getting Peter to make sure that his his people as an MPP ask the questions. Every day we need to keep plugging away at Minister Lecce and Premier Ford, and even writing your MP. I had the opportunity to meet with 3 MPs and bring them up to date with how the rollout at the federal level is impacting childcare centers at the municipal level, and they were so surprised. So when you write your letters, don't just write to your MPP, CC your MP. Make sure people are aware, because together we are stronger. And I know it's an uphill battle, and I wish it weren't so. And we are on the cusp of something that could be really good. The Sewell program in its heart is going to really support families, but we need to make sure that all families are supported and that childcare centers also can remain solvent as the rollout happens. So the fight isn't over, but we are moving forward. So anyway, keep your head up. We can do this. It might just take us a little while, and these are the growing pains of a new program.
Okay. Donna, thank you very much. Carolyn.
Thanks, Donna, and Sara. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I agree with what everybody said. I'll just add, I agree, Donna. It is hard to not have all of the answers to the questions. And, there's a poster, the childcare advocates have this poster. It's from the 1980s. It's got all of these old childcare buttons, like, Ehrhardt daycare and things from that time. And it says on it in big block letters, still struggling for better childcare. And it is a struggle. It's always been a struggle. It's been a 60-year struggle to get a national childcare program started here in Canada. And it is something that we're going to have to continue to struggle with, right? We're going to have to continue to work at. We're building the first new social program in Canada since Medicare, right? It's going to be hard. And so what I found, though, over years of advocating on childcare is the only way to do it is together. You have to link up with other people and find your people and then advocate together. So as Donna said, the coalition and the Association of Early Childhood Educators are forming a parent and family network. We've had 2 sessions so far. The first one we had over 200 parents who came out and were sharing their struggles. The last one we had parents were able to talk together in small groups about what they're facing and share ways to build their power together. And the next session we're having, which is on May the 7th at 8 p.m. and we'll be able to send out the information to folks, through I'm sure through the mailing list here. May 7th at 8 p.m. is going to be a training on meeting with your MPP, because I think it's really important that we bring these issues to every MPP of every political party, right? And as you said, Donna, to our MPs as well, right? Because we need to turn this from something where I feel like the federal, provincial governments and the municipal governments are kind of like pointing fingers. It's like the 3 Spider-Man meme. We need to change that to something where they know that parents and families, early childhood educators and childcare operators are expecting them to get this right. They can't keep pointing fingers or tossing political footballs anymore. This goes beyond partisanship. We're building a new social program together, and we need everybody to take part and everybody to work to get this right. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn. Well, I get, as the host, to have the last word. I think our 3 panelists have put it out pretty straightforwardly. If you look at our history, people have actually made advances on the childcare front, but not enough. And those efforts of mobilization, of parent advocacy, and putting pressure on politicians, on governments, are going to be critical to getting any of the problems resolved that we see today. I'm glad, Carolyn, that the Ontario Coalition is pulling together this training system for parent advocates. We need it. We need a lot of them. And I'm very happy to work with all three of you to advance this at the legislature. You should know that we do raise questions about this regularly, and we are regularly told that everything is fine and just don't bother your pointy little head about it. That is not a great answer when you're talking about parents and families facing very, very difficult conditions. So my thanks to my three panelists. You are excellent. I look forward to meeting with you another day. For you out there in the audience, you won't know that behind the scenes, Rob Kaufman, Elaine Perkins, and Louise Moran from my office actually pulled all of this together and kept the lights on through this meeting. My thanks to the three of them, and to all of you who attended this evening. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you taking the time. I look forward to talking to you and working with you for advocacy in the years to come. Take care, everyone. Have a good night. Take care.